This is week 162 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Dominic Culverwell, reporting to you from Kyiv. Anna is off this week, so I will be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine. A quick note before we begin. Last month, we introduced a new segment in which members of the Kyiv independent community can submit questions to be answered at the end of each episode. When you become a member of our community, you get access to our Discord server, where there's now a channel where we'll share the topics of the week. You guys can submit questions and we'll select a few every week to answer. You can find out more about membership at the link in the description below. Ukraine's minerals are back in the news again, and things are looking worse than ever. Kyiv confirmed it had received a new version of the resources agreement with the United States on March 28th, after it was leaked by the Financial Times. As of now, negotiations are still ongoing. The leak caused uproar in Ukraine, with one Ukrainian MP, Yaroslav Zhelezniak, calling it downright horrible. Others have likened it to economic colonialism and said it was far worse than the last offer, which President Volodymyr Zelensky was supposed to sign in Washington before the now infamous Oval Office spat on February 28th. Although things went quiet for weeks after the White House meeting, US President Donald Trump apparently hasn't lost his fixation on Ukraine's resources and continues to push the deal as a path to peace. He's ramped up pressure on Kyiv in the last week, and the Ukrainian delegation is expected to discuss the deal in the US soon. Ukraine has to tread carefully. When the last deal collapsed in Washington, Trump retaliated by temporarily cutting off Ukrainian aid and suspending military intelligence sharing, setting off alarm bells in Kyiv. Zelensky told reporters in Paris on March 27th that Ukraine doesn't want to send signals that it is not interested in a deal and go down that path again. That hasn't stopped Trump from hurling accusations at the Ukrainian leader. Last week, he claimed Zelensky wanted to back out of the deal. He warned that Zelensky would face big problems if he does. So why is the new agreement so bad? The previous agreement was a vague memorandum of understanding with details for a reconstruction fund to be ironed out down the line. But the new version is a fully fledged 55-page deal detailing the government of the fund, and it covers way more than just minerals and natural resources. It gives the US unprecedented influence over investments in Ukraine's roads and railways, ports, mines, oil and gas, and extraction operations, although nuclear power plants were noticeably not included in the deal, as previously suggested. The US would also get first dibs on all future projects related to the fund. Washington can even prohibit the sale of critical minerals to countries deemed competitors of the US, which, in this case, would be the European Union. Instead of being on equal footing with the US, Washington's new version of the deal downgrades Ukraine to a passive role. The board would have 3 American representatives and 2 Ukrainian. But the Americans get the right to veto all decisions. In short, they are the captains of the fund, and Ukraine is just a passenger. What does Ukraine get in return? Well, nothing. No security guarantees, new aid, or financial contributions to the fund from the US, as Washington believes its prior aid to wartime Ukraine, given under no payback conditions, to be its contribution. Ukraine, on the other hand, would have to pay 50% of earnings from new natural resources and infrastructure projects to the fund. The US gets rights to all profits with 4% interest until its aid contribution has been repaid, roughly $100 billion. Only then will Kyiv start receiving earnings from the fund. For now, it is not clear when the agreement will be signed and what the new terms could be. It is very unlikely that Ukraine's parliament will sign off on the current version, mainly because it contradicts Ukraine's critical materials deal signed with the EU in 2021. In short, Trump's team is proposing a deal that would profit Washington while offering no support to Ukraine as it continues to fight Russian aggression, and it could even jeopardize Ukraine's EU membership. It remains to be seen whether Ukraine can find a way out of this trap, without further souring its relationship with the US. Trump unveiled his grand tariffs plan on April the 2nd, targeting pretty much everyone, including America's key allies, although notably not Russia and Belarus. Ukraine wasn't spared either, with a 10% tariff on all Ukrainian goods, apart from metal products, which have already been subject to a 25% tariff since March. Other countries were punished harder than Ukraine, including its key trade partner, the EU. Trump slapped a blanket 20% tariff on all European goods. Trump claims the tariffs will help kickstart American industry, accusing other countries of looting, raping, pillaging, and plundering the US. Economists argue that the tariffs will have a negative impact on the global economy and could spark a trade war that will hit Ukraine too. Ukraine's trade with the US has declined in recent years as Kyiv pivots towards the EU, its closest trading partner. The US market only makes up 2% of Ukraine's total exports, but it could suffer the knock-on effects from a contracted global economy. Ukraine's exports to the US are largely metal products like pig iron and pipes. Agricultural products like food and fertilizers will also drop slightly, but this won't be very critical for Ukraine. Most of its agricultural products end up in neighboring EU countries, as well as China and Turkey. Ukrainian small businesses will be hit hardest. Ukraine's economy minister said the tariffs will be difficult but not critical for the country's economy, and it's rolling out support programs for Ukrainian businesses. The ministry said Ukraine won't hit back with its own tariffs on American imports, which reached $3.4 billion last year. Imposing tariffs on an ally at war and not the aggressor state did raise eyebrows over here in Kyiv. The White House defended its decision not to impose tariffs on Russia and Belarus by saying that it had already enforced economic sanctions against both countries. However, Russia and the US are still trading, with Washington importing around $3 billion worth of Russian goods last year. This is more than Ukraine and other countries on the tariff list, including Mauritius and Brunei. Ukrainians already suspect Trump is being too lenient on Russia, and this doesn't help his case, particularly after he also removed sanctions on the wife of Putin's close associate, Boris Rosenberg, on April the 2nd. But we did see a different side to Trump in the last week. On March 30th, Trump said he was very angry and pissed off with Putin during an interview with NBC, condemning Putin's suggestion to replace Zelensky's administration with a transitional government. In a surprising move, Trump threatened secondary tariffs on Russian oil for heel-dragging the peace process. This would mean any country buying oil from Russia would face a 25 to 50% tariff, targeting Russia's main cash cow. Democrats and Republicans alike are both growing weary of Putin delaying the peace process. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal are leading a bill that would impose a 500% tariff on countries buying Russian oil, gas, uranium, and other key exports. The bill has yet to be passed, but it could seriously crack down on Russia's main sources of money, backing its war machine. While some Ukrainians were initially hopeful that Trump might be on their side when he got elected, feelings of goodwill have fallen dramatically since his inauguration in January. From berating Zelensky in the Oval Office to temporarily cutting off aid to Ukraine, many in the country have been shocked by Trump's actions. While views have now shifted, our newsroom intern Yana Protz visited one local cafe that has undergone a similar transformation.
As Ukrainians grow increasingly frustrated on US President Donald Trump's stance on Ukraine, one coffee shop in Kyiv decided it was time for a rebrand.
Changes are still fresh that locals still give directions using the previous name, and the coffee shop hasn't even yet changed the internet password from Trump loves you.
Trump Cafe opened in 2019 during Trump's first term in office in residential area of Ukrainian capital. It was only January of this year that the cafe offered a special Trump sour cocktail to celebrate Trump inauguration. But currently the cafe is rebranding as Nolan.
The coffee shop management no longer highlights their former admiration for Donald Trump. They claim the name was inspired by a Trump card in poker, yet the cafe sign depicted Donald Trump in a traditional Ukrainian shirt.
Як для бренду, то, скоріш за все, це позитивне рішення. І враховуючи загальну зовнішньополітичну ситуацію, то ті, хто володіють кав'ярнею, вони зробили правильно. Якщо брати як одіозного політика, то цікаво і весело наблюдати, але як міжнародний лідер і президент одної з самої великої країни в світі, то його рішення, є певні негативні. Я б, напевно, порекомендував би йому передивитися його оточення, яке дає йому поради.
The cafe hasn't explained their new name yet, but they have already announced a new refreshing cocktail, Nolan Sour.
To stay up to date with all the developments in the US-Russia-Ukraine negotiations, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Even if you're not a Trump fan, don't let that put you off hitting the like button. If you think of a president who seeks a peaceful resolution to a war that he started, what kind of decisions could he be making that signal that? Whatever came to your mind, I bet it's not ordering the largest conscription in 14 years. But this is exactly what Russian President Vladimir Putin did this week. Alongside ongoing aerial attacks on Ukraine and demanding impossible conditions, this is yet another decision that all but shows Russia's true plans, increasing its military capabilities and continuing its ongoing war in Ukraine until there is no independent Ukraine. Russia's spring conscription will gather 160,000 18 to 30-year-old men for mandatory military service. This is 10,000 more than last year's spring effort, and 30,000 more than the full conscription period. Conscripted men will have to serve for at least 1 year, although are not typically deployed in active combat. At the same time, Russia plans to increase its military grouping in Ukraine by 150,000 soldiers in 2025, equivalent to around 15 motorized infantry divisions, Presidential Office Deputy Head Pavlo Pelisa said on April 3rd. That would increase Russia's forces fighting against Ukraine to about 750,000 soldiers. According to analysts and Ukrainian intelligence, Russia is preparing a new multi-pronged offensive in the coming weeks. President Zelensky said that Russia may attack in northeastern Sumy and Kharkiv oblasts. The Russian army has lost nearly 1 million soldiers since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, according to the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces. Nevertheless, Russia has plenty of men still in the country, and its military is estimated to be 1.5 million. While Putin needs to keep numbers topped up, he is careful not to scare off potential recruits with mass mobilization. A disastrous mobilization effort in September 2022 led to over 260,000 Russians fleeing the country to avoid being sent to war. As more and more Russians are sent home in coffins, the Kremlin has turned to financial incentives to attract new members, with a $21,000 sign-up bonus. Moscow also streamlined the conscription service to make it easier to draft men, including those that previously evaded service. Although Russia continues to engage in peace negotiations with the US, its actions show anything but a readiness to shift the country off its war-bound track. For our member question this week, we have this from Michael. Why doesn't Ukraine just agree to the minerals deal, even if it is a bad deal, just to keep Trump happy and the weapons support coming? Surely Ukraine can also renegotiate better terms when a new, more friendly administration gains power in America? It's a good question and something I discussed in the newsroom with my colleagues earlier this week. It's hard to speculate what's going on at the negotiation table, But generally, Ukrainians believe Trump is a businessman that can be negotiated with. Ukrainians aren't saying no to a deal, just to one that is so one-sided. It's possible that Kyiv can come up with an agreement that benefits both Ukraine and the US, satisfying both sides. But Ukraine also runs the risk of upsetting its main ally, the EU, if it signs this version of the agreement. Since the EU provides the most support to Ukraine and is committed to remaining a firm ally, Kyiv needs to keep Brussels in mind too. Otherwise, it risks upsetting everyone and not getting anything in return. At the same time, Ukraine has repeatedly asked for security guarantees to be included in a deal. The US previously suggested that the presence of American companies would be a deterrent, but considering that American companies were already present in Ukraine before the full-scale invasion, this is a pretty weak argument. That rounds up another eventful week in Ukraine. Thanks for watching. Don't worry, Anna will be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you enjoyed my takeover, you can read my coverage on the Kyiv Independent website. If you have any burning questions, sign up as a member of our community and you can ask our journalists anything you want. We appreciate all the support we get, and a big thank you to those that donate via YouTube. Your support really helps us get through this difficult time.